Mm.
So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Living Wild Black, Blue, and Pink. This is our third episode, and for those of you that are new to the Living Wild Black, Blue, and Pink community, Living Wild Black, Blue, and Pink was started a little just at a year ago in the wake of what we were all experiencing in 2020 with the COVID pandemic and with the racial injustice and the George Floyd incident. I felt that I wanted to do something to help my community. Um, and what I realized that there weren't enough voices of women of color in law enforcement. And I wanted to share some unique perspectives and share that with the community. And Living Wild Black, Blue, and Pink was formed. Um, I didn't think that we'd still be here, but 1 year later, I've been asked to do these over and over again. And so I know that right now it's in the summer, all over. We are opening up and people are going back outdoors, and there's so many other things that you could be doing. So I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule this Wednesday evening to join us and join our conversation. And this time, our conversation is around the topic called the trauma of the talk. But before I do, we get more into that, I'd like to make some introductions. So first, I'm going to introduce my co-host, my partner in crime, my friend, my D9 sorority sister, and in addition, someone who we walk the streets together in New York City as police officers. So I'd like to introduce Flora Krind, who also had a background in social work, and I'm sure she's going to lend something to the conversation. Welcome, Flora.
Thank you. Thank you for having me once again. Hello, everybody.
You're welcome. And second, I would like to, no, you know what, before I hold off on introducing some of our guests, I just like to do one thing, because one of the, what we're mainly going to talk about is something that inspired me about another incident. But if you're in the New York area or maybe nationally, you might have heard that in an area of Queens called the Rockaways, there was a young boy by the name of Justin Wallace who was senselessly gunned down, traveling with his uncle and going home. So before we move more into the program, I'd just like to give a few seconds just to hold some space, just to remember Justin Wallace and any of the young people that have been senselessly killed by violence. Thank you. And with that in mind, and it was just sort of eerie that this happened, I was turning on the news this evening as I was getting ready to do this show tonight, and there was a vigil held in Justin Wallace's honor. And there was a woman on there, and she was speaking at the vigil so full of passion. And one of the things she said is, "This is deep-rooted trauma. This is deep-rooted trauma." So tonight's topic is the trauma behind the talk. And I'll talk a little bit more about my inspiration about why I decided to call it the trauma behind the talk. But before we get right into our topics, I want to introduce this young brother that I came across and I met. And he is a author, he is a illustrator, and he wrote this book called Black and Blue. He's going to tell us a bit more about it, and he is published by a company called Light Switch Learning, who offers an entire line of family engagement resources and text and picture books. I put information in the chat about the Light Switch Learning array of books, but I want you to support this brother, Jared Sams. I'm going to bring him to the front of the Facebook Live and Zoom so he can introduce himself to us and tell us a bit about his book, Black and Blue. Welcome, Jared.
Hey, how you doing? Pleasure being here. Pleasure being here again. It's always great talking to you. Black and Blue. It's a graphic novel, kind of created for middle school age students. It's a book that is attempting to make sense and help young people process the sort of, like you said, the trauma of a lot of these events. Essentially, it's about a young black guy. His name is Jackson, and he's a newly sworn in officer of the NYPD. And he's proudly a cop. He's also proudly black, and his first day happens to be the day that the George Floyd footage hit last year. And so he has a bit of identity crisis as he's going through, the subsequent protests and, his own emotions and feelings. And ultimately he's kind of caught between, his brother, who's an activist, and, his kind of brothers in blue. And he's kind of has to decide and understand where he fits in and what he can do to make change.
Great, thanks. And we're going to get a little bit more into the book and some of the characters and how it connects to this week's topic. But before we do this, we are honored. In fact, last week we had some surprise guests pop in. And so we are now honored with another surprise guest. I understand that State Senator Leroy Comrie is here, and he's going to bring us some greetings. Senator Comrie, are you here?
Yes, I am. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank thank this group for putting this together to keep it a brand and living well black, blue, and pink. This is a great topic. I'm very intrigued to hear the details of this book. I think it's a great idea, and I'm sure that Brother Sims has put together a interesting read for people to take a look at. I look forward to reading it myself. But even more importantly, I want to thank this group, Sister Kren and everyone else that has been working to make this happen. Haven't seen you in a long time.
Long time, Negro, very long time.
Yes, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yes, Sister, everyone else that's part of this. This is great for many reasons. It's good that we're empowering ourselves. We're sharing resources. We're giving young people a chance to shine and show their creativity on a larger scale. This is really what community should be all about. Each one helping in your profession, making sure that you have an opportunity to grow, to learn, to share your highs and lows, the good and the bad, and also to empower other people, because we need to force. I want to see another black police commissioner. The last time we really had major change in the department was under the last police commissioner. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name, and it's a dishonor to him, but I just finished vetting 300 people today. Some names are jumbling in my head, but the last black police commissioner made major changes in the force, and things haven't happened to the police department in a major way since he left. There's been other technical things that they've done, but they've never done, the things that the last commissioner did while he was here. We need to have a police department that's more reflective of our community at the top, and I think this is a real opportunity to see that happen from the ground up. So I just want to congratulate all of you, encourage you to continue to support each other and to help each other and to find the young talent, because we have a lot of young people that are talented, they're skills, they just are looking for people to embrace them and show them off so that we can show them to the world. So thank you for doing this. I want to thank Light Switch Learning and all of the people that were involved with this, and for Lynette Shelburne Barfield from my office for making sure that I could patch in. We're still in Albany. This is our last week, and we're doing a lot of things, including trying to make some things happen. But we're happy to sponsor programs, to work with you, to get messaging out, to do anything we can to empower and uplift and educate our people. So thank you for hosting this program. Thank you for bringing yourselves together as a group. And I look forward to working with you on other projects in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Comrie. And as he said, he's like rushing in between back and forth on the floor, dealing with important legislation. But from my time in the police department as a captain and deputy inspector in community affairs, Senator Comrie was always deeply, deeply involved with police issues. And I think you might have been talking about Commissioner Lee P. Brown, if that's what you're referring to as a commissioner. And diversity is definitely one of the issues that we talk about. But tonight, what I want to talk about is trauma. And because of that, I want to bring on another sister who also was a friend and colleague, but actually I met her again in my days in the police department. So I'd like to bring on Sonia Davey, and she has a whole bunch of alphabets in the back of her name. And so I'm not from the social work world, so she can explain to us what that means. Sonia Davies, LMHC-CHIMP. Sonia is a highly sought after expert in integrative psychotherapy and emotional eating. She's been called upon by a number of organizations, including the New York City Police Department, the Department of Education, an arm of the New York City Police Department called PAPA, and she can maybe share a bit about that. The Department of Corrections and the Department of Homeless Services. She's gifted with an innate ability to connect with people, which causes them to relax their defenses and establish an unexpected trust. By combining her passions as a licensed mental health counselor, certified in mental health nutrition, a health coach, and advanced fitness instructor, Sonia provides cutting-edge education on holistic practices to improve mental, cognitive, and physical health. And she counsels hundreds of clients annually on how to identify behaviors. She's garnered frequent guest speaker appearances on the Hot 97 radio show, News 12, and The Source 360, and is a contributing mental health expert for The Source and a clinician with PAPA of the NYPD. She received her graduate degree from Lincoln University. She is a member of Pi Gamma Mu International Honor Society in Social Services, and a proud member, as all of us on the stage, ladies, are a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So Sonia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. That was a lot, so I'll definitely keep it brief. But trauma is a very important conversation because it's so much that people don't know about it and how it affects them. And just briefly, in terms of being a clinician with PAPA, for those that don't know, that's police officers providing peer assistance. So they combine with mental health professionals to provide therapy exclusively to the NYPD. And I love it. It's my third year working with them. But then prior to that, for close to 10 years, I taught anger management to guys that were, to people that were involved in the legal system. And primarily they were guys that were coming home from prison. So I'm on both ends. Now, I talk about health and nutrition because that's in my private practice, but my experience in terms of trauma comes exclusively from those environments. And so I think, this is a very necessary conversation. So thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. So let's get right in. So tonight was called The Trauma of the Talk. So I wanted to first just talk briefly about the talk. And so to prepare for this, I did my intellectual research, which means I Googled it. But what was interesting was when I Googled it, two things came up with the talk. The first thing that came up with the talk is that the talk that parents have about their children about sex. But if you go into an African-American community or community of color, the talk means something different. So what I wanted to do is ask each of you what the talk means to you, and I'll end with you, Sonia. So I'd like to start with Flora. When we say the talk, what do we mean? You're on mute, Flora. Flora, you're on mute.
There I go. We've had two types of talks, talks about birds and bees and where babies come from. And now the talk has made a left. The talk is about, especially when you have young teenage children going out and being social to how to conduct themselves in the world, how to conduct themselves when they're walking the street, going to a party, getting together at a friend's house, going to the store, how to react when an authority figure comes your way, and the things you need to look out for. You know, I mean, I don't have never. So I also give the talk about the don't slouch, don't play the music too loud, you know, wear the seatbelt, don't look suspicious, whatever that means. You know, the look around, it's a whole scenario of talk. It's exhausting, but they need that talk because a lot of them don't know. They're just trying to get to their destinations. So we give them that talk, especially when you come from that single parent household. If there isn't a male figure there, my nephew, his father passed away. So lucky for me being that police officer, I gave him that talk. And I gave him that talk at about 12 years old, you know, and when his father was alive. And now I gave him that talk at 18 to let him know what you did at 12 is totally different than what you're doing at 18. And if you are approached. So that's the talk for me, you know, how to conduct yourself when any authoritative figure comes your way. And it does not only mean law enforcement. It could be anything from store owners to people on the street, anything, you know. So it's just basically that how to conduct yourself in public conversation.
Thank you, Flora. So Jared, I'd like to hear from you. When we say the talk, what does that mean to you?
Man, yeah, well, I mean, what all the things Flora is saying is like really resonant, right? That's you know, she said in such a great way. I think the talk for me also is just it's a way of empowering you, right? Of like kind of taking a bit of agency and, you know, power in you know. So you hear about these events, you hear about like, you know, Black men and women being, you know, shot by police or even, you know, just in general figures of authority, and you get a little scared, you get a little frustrated, you know. So the talk is a way to, it's almost like a weapon, right? It's almost like you know, like it's like we're sending you out in the world, and here's a shield, here's a sword, you know, just so you know this is how you protect yourself. It's not with violence or anything like that, but it's with knowledge. It's knowing how to conduct yourself, and the kind of world, you know, that you can unfortunately predictably expect. So that's what the talk sort of like kind of means to me.
Thanks. So, you know, for being, you know, in a family of color, the talk is something that happened in my family, maybe a little different because we were a family of police, but we know it happens in households all over the country. But in 2016, the talk was sort of popularized by the show Blackish. And I don't know if you remember that, it was during the Ferguson shooting, unfortunately, but the talk was actually played out in front of everyone on TV and everyone talked about it. So I was able to pull some quotes from that. And Ruby, who was the grandmother figure, said, "Listen to me. If you have to talk to the cops, there's only 7 words you need to know. Yes, sir, no, sir, and thank you, sir." And then Tracy Ellis Ross as Rainbow said, "Exactly. You have to make sure you live to fight your case in court." So I now want to just sort of turn, because there are so many workshops and conversations about the talk, giving the talk, what to say in the talk. What I want to focus on tonight is, what does having that talk do to individuals? What does that do to us? And that's where the trauma behind the talk comes in. So Sonia, I'd like to kick it off with you with the first question. What is trauma, first of all?
Trauma is basically a response to an event that is very stressful, that's unexpected, that has a huge impact on your mental and your physical health. There's different types of trauma. You know, there's the acute trauma, which is from a single event, like a 9/11. You have the chronic trauma that's just repeated. So it could either be something either at home or outside that is just chronic. And then you have the complex trauma. And that's where you are just exposed to multiple traumas all the time. And so, you know, it has an impact on your psyche after a while. And I think for a lot of people, because they get so used to it, they just think that that's just my life, or that's just how I live, or that's just how we live, or that's how Black people live, without really realizing, no, this is not a healthy existence. But if it's just all you know, like I said, especially in the case of complex trauma, that's just all they know, and that they function from that space, which is not always the most ideal. You know, the way that they respond, or the way that they, you know, handle themselves from that. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what trauma is. Go ahead.
So if you're traumatized, how does that show up?
Trauma, oh my goodness, long-term effects of trauma can show up so many ways. It can show up in your mood, the shifting mood. It can show up from health issues. Chronic illnesses can be attached to trauma, sleep disturbances, feeling low self-esteem, not feeling powerful. It can definitely show up in a lot of anger and rage, because I did in teaching anger management. There was a lot of trauma behind it, and teaching people the difference between anger and rage. And a lot of times those were responses or ways that they were responding because of being in you know, chronic trauma. It can affect your health as well as your mental health as well. And the thing with trauma, you know, the responses of trauma can go on for a long time, because your body doesn't have a time limit. If you're not aware, you can be responding to trauma 10, 20, 30 years from now in an unhealthy manner, where the roots of that behavior is from trauma.
Thank you. So Jared, when I went through the book again, I saw great examples of each of the characters, especially the two brothers, experiencing trauma. Mm-hmm. And I think, though, before we continue that conversation, why don't you share a little bit more about the story? I think you had started telling the story of Black and Blue, and then Senator Connery came in. So if there's anything else that you wanted to add to the story, and then maybe after you add to the story, maybe we can cue the video about the story, and then we can continue our conversation.
Yeah, sure. That's perfect. Yeah, so with Black and Blue, we really wanted to make something that students could read and relate to, but also, like, from reading and relating to it, have productive conversations about not just race and injustice, but also about trauma, also about you know, how do you process these events, and for us, you know, like, you know, Publisher Licensed Learning, they're fantastic, and they gave me the leeway to sort of to tell the story, you know, in a very personal way. You know, after 2020 and George Floyd, wasn't just George Floyd. George Floyd was kind of like almost like a bit of the tip of the spear, right? There was, you know, other events even in that year that led to George Floyd and to a lot of the kind of upheaval there. But it was important to, like, make something that personally helped me process what's going on, and hopefully it could be a tool to students and parents to help give a bit of a guidepost to how to help their students and kids do the same. And so, yeah, so part of that was sort of presenting these characters in, like, really genuine ways. So the main character, Jackson, he's kind of, like I said, he's going through identity crisis. He's kind of caught between his sort of role as a police officer and his identity as a Black man, you know, and understanding kind of the history between those two, not extremes, but those two sort of, like, identities. It's a thing that he has to kind of understand. And we try to use his brother, who's an activist, and his training officer as sort of kind of like proxy arguments, right? They're like the two sides his mind, kind of like making the discussion, talking about this, kind of him understanding what his role is, because it's complicated, right? Like it's hard to process a lot of this stuff. It's hard to, there's no easy answers, right? There's no one way to understand trauma. There's no one way to deal with this stuff. And the best thing you can do is understand what you can do or what you can bring or your role in it. You know, it's a very personal kind of topic. It's a very personal thing that, you know, it's a very personal thing that has to, like I said, it's hard because there's no one way to do it, right? There's no, you know, oh, hey kids, here's this list and do the list and you'll be perfectly fine, because it'll be different for each person. So it's important when making the book to sort of, you know, to show that a little bit too, and to sort of build a book that can have that sort of impact and effect.
Right. So let's roll the video so the audience, those that have not seen this great book, Black and Blue, please get it now. Let's see the trailer, and then we can talk a bit about some of the individual characters. So great, thanks for that. And as we continue talking, Jared, I had, when I went through the book again, I saw some particular images in the book that I want us to kind of point up and try to talk about the different characters and whether you were feeling that they were experiencing trauma, and have Flora and Sonia weigh in on that. So, I was wondering if you could share some of the images from the book that we were touching on.
Yeah, you want me to pull those up?
Yep.
All right, sorry. Oh man, give me 1 sec. I'm sorry, I'm so ill. I wasn't.
And sure, as you're doing that, we'll also continue the conversation, and we'll see it up. So, trauma again does, you know. So, Sonia and Flora, do you think that when we're having this talk with our children about what to do when you're stopped by the police, is that talk actually causing trauma? Flora, I'll go to you first, and then Sonia.
Not at first, because you're putting them in preparation, you know, for that, you know, anything that will occur. I try to make it as less traumatizing as possible. I play Ice Cube's "Today is a Good Day." You know, I started off with that, believe it or not, where he's just waking up in the morning, walking through the neighborhood, not being stopped by the police, not getting involved in any kind of altercations. His day and his life is just a nice day. And something that's a rarity in a lot of urban neighborhoods. And, you know, our young men out there, they do come from a lot of the urban neighborhoods, and sometimes every day is not a good day. So that's how I started off, you know, in conversation, like, what happens when we don't have a good day? What do we do? So I like to hear what they do rather than just give them that talk. I want to know what exactly they will be doing.
Mhm.
You know, I want to know. I want to know from how they dress to everything. Now, I'm not going to exhaust them of, you got to put on this, you got to put on that. It's too exhausting.
Mhm.
I want them to be as normal as possible. So what I try to do is get them aware of what makes them more seen than others. Because if you a very diverse, multi-private school, and they don't go through that type of trauma. But when he comes to visit his aunties in Brooklyn, and I send him to the store, that might happen, and more in the inner city. And I want him to be prepared. So I don't traumatize him. I just basically try to keep him aware of what to look for in anything you do. And hopefully with that type of upbringing, he can address the officer, like Ruby said in Blackish, yes, sir, no, sir, and have a nice day. Rather than, why'd you stop me? Is it because I am? Nothing confrontational. And it's unfortunate that we have to tell our little Black and brown young people this, but it's in order to keep them safe and alive, believe it or not. It really is, to get them to where they're going.
Thanks, Flora. Sonia?
It all depends on how the parent starts the conversation, how it's delivered. I know for, that's definitely, because if it comes from a parent that's extremely anxious and like, oh my God, you can't do this, and you got to be careful of the police. Like if they're coming across very anxious, it can be traumatic for them, because again, trauma for a lot of people, you don't feel like you have power because of something that happened. So if a parent comes across and makes them feel like you're helpless to this situation, there's nothing you could do, you just hopefully by luck you won't be attacked by the police, then that can be traumatic. Now for my son at the time, I had to have the talk when Trayvon Martin's death, because that really affected him, where it really affected him, because he was that kid that went to a private school, Upper West Side, independent school. That kind of stuff was not discussed. That wasn't a part of his world. But when we live, just in general, it doesn't matter where you live, you're a Black man in America, we had to have that conversation. So Trayvon Martin's, it really affected him. I guess I wasn't surprised, because I was like, okay, you're in this world, so this is not a part of your everyday conversation with kids about the police. You just grew up thinking the police was okay. That's the only conversation you got. So I had to really talk with him, because he had an issue with police. I mean, he's never been in trouble, but he looked at the police as the enemy because of that for a while. And I had to really do a lot of work to redirect him, to redirect his thinking, and to kind of give him a sense of agency over those type of situations. And but like I said, the Trayvon Martin and then everything that followed just really had an impact. So yeah, the talk, it can be, like Flora said, it depends on how you deliver it. But in this case, like I said, if the events hit from the news, it can be a little traumatic, because especially the way we were having them repetitive. We were having like those stories, like every month there was something happening to a Black man, running with the police.
So I have a bit of a different take on that. That the talk, so it's one that the talk is sort of therapeutic and sort of prophylactic in that way, that it's not causing the trauma, and we intend for it not to cause the trauma. But and Flora, you might want to back me up on this. Having given those conversations and presenting in community forums about the talk, what we get from the public is, well, why is it that I have to listen to the police? Why do I have to do everything that's right if the officer is racist? Why can't I step up and do something? So I thought about that the fact that we're telling somebody that you have to yield to the power can cause trauma, because in that moment, people want to be able to express themselves. But if you're not able to express yourself and you're told that over and over and over again, is that a phenomenon that causes trauma?
Yes, it can, because again, with trauma, you don't feel empowered. You don't feel like you have power. So again, if you're hearing this message and you are running up against, officers where you're being, violated and whatever that looks like, but you feel like there's nothing you can do about it. Absolutely, that can be traumatic. Absolutely, because it's like, you're telling me to do this, but I don't have any power. They have all the power. They're the ones. Everything's always going to go in their favor. The cases are always going to be not guilty. So why bother? And that absolutely that can translate to, again, like I said, a form of trauma, because it's, I don't know what's going to happen when I see the police. A lot of times when people respond out of anger to the police, a lot of time it's anxiousness too, because it's like, I don't know what they're going to do. So they, will do something on a reflex, trying to gain power in the wrong way. And it just becomes a combustion and a very bad situation. But a lot of times, like I said, that anger or reflex is out of anxiety, because it's like, I don't know what to do. They're going to have all the power over me. There's nothing I can do about it. So no, I totally agree with you in that regard.
What about parents? Does having the talk cause trauma for parents or bring up their own traumas? I was impressed by a story that I heard about a parent, and the parent realized that in talking to their child about having this so-called talk about violence, their child, as you said, hadn't experienced anything bad by the police. So the parent was imposing their own life experiences on their child. So is that conversation in and of itself having trauma amongst the parents?
It can, because they can have, again, unresolved issues that they've never, expressed or talked about when it came to, when it comes to the police. I haven't had those, so that's why I was able to have that conversation with him. And he never had it, but I still had to redirect his thinking. But yeah, parents, again, have to be careful in their delivery of that. So, that they don't put that on the kids, because that kind of that type of thinking, that mentality is definitely transferable. Well, my mother, she had a, police arrested her for such and such, and then they take on that, and all of a sudden you become the enemy because of your mom or your dad's experience. So all police become the enemy because of mom and dad's experience, or because of their brother's or anyone else's experience. All police now become the enemy. So yeah, it can be definitely transferred.
And so in the book, as Jared explained, this is a story in the trailer showed you about two brothers. And it's interesting that what mentioned already was September 11th and Trayvon Martin, and in Black and Blue, the family is actually watching the account of the Trayvon Martin incident. And that is the first spark for one of the brothers to outburst and say, this isn't fair. I'm going to go do something. And so, Jared, when you were creating the book, were you thinking about those thoughts of rage? And maybe, I don't know if you thought about it as trauma, or was that a theme that came up for you as you were illustrating the book?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things it was important for me to not just, like I said, address, obviously the social justice and injustice aspect of the story, but also, like I said, this is a book for students, for young people, right? And you don't want to shy away from what this is, right? We're talking about traumatic events. We're talking about watching video of of people dying, of people dying. Like, that's not something you can just, it's not something you can play around. You know what I mean? That's something you got to dive into directly. And so yeah, I mean, even in the scene you're talking about, when the book opens with the main character Jackson as kind of like the age of the kids who would be reading this book, right? Him and his brother, they're kind of going through the Trayvon Martin shooting and the subsequent case, and their mother tells them, hey, you guys should journal this stuff. You guys should take steps to understand and process this trauma, because that's what this is, right? And one brother kind of, he's angry, right? And he doesn't want to hear that, right? His efforts go into something else, whereas the main character, he sort of embraces that tool, right? And throughout the book, it's about him sort of like talking through his emotions, about him talking through the gamut of crazy emotions and feelings he's kind of going through as he's going through this extraordinary moment in history. So yeah, dealing with that stuff was top priority.
Trying to unmute myself while you're doing that. So let's switch gears a bit. And this is something that I think the book does a really good job of, and I don't know if people think enough about it. Being an officer of color is a situation that causes trauma. And in several instances in the book, you see illustrations of that for the character. You see him, standing on the lines, being that person that's representing the law to people that look like you and being the object of the anger. There's an incident in the book where the character that's a police officer comes across some young people, and they were already under arrest, and the character makes a move, and he's actually threatened by one of the officers that's not something that you do. So Flora, I want you to speak to that. Did you feel, or do you feel that officers experience levels of trauma, and do officers of color experience levels of trauma?
Absolutely. I mean, as a retired police officer now, but I remember being on patrol. You had a majority of Black police officers who were officers, their first generation officers of their time, where it was a rarity like yourself, where you had officers who had fathers or grandfathers or brothers or cousins. So we didn't understand the culture. Everything was new to us. We were there to really help out the community we thought was giving back. But sometimes the community, you got to do your job. You're going to experience not all great things, but some of the bad things as well. And it does cause trauma. You're going into situations that can get pretty ugly. I've been called, my gosh, I've had a child one time, 12 years old, and he told me, I hate cops. And all I could say to him was, why? I didn't have anything else to give him. I asked him why. And then he told me about his big brother, how they went to the store and a police officer stopped them. And the brother was like, get off me. And before you know it, it was a tussle and he got arrested. And it traumatized him. And no one ever spoke to this child to see if he was okay. The parents couldn't talk to him, schools, police officers, no one spoke to him. And he just watched in horror as his big brother got taken away. And he had to find his way back home. And it didn't live far, but it was still a long walk home. And I think that day just traumatized him forever. And no matter what I said to him to let him know that I'm not the bad guy, it took a while. It took a while. And it's traumatizing because I didn't come on this job to be the bad guy. I came on this job to be Superwoman. I'm going into my community and I'm going to help all the people who need help and put away the bad guys and try to make it safe. A rude awakening. It doesn't work that way. Your own people could turn against you so fast because you represent that badge. You are on their team, as they would say. What the kids in South Jamaica used to call me, you're on a legal gang. That's all. Your gang is just legal. So it was hard to gain that trust. I think it took me my entire career to gain some sort of trust from the people, especially the young people. They just don't understand because of all the trauma they go through each and every day, not only with the police, but just in life general.
Sonia, this is your lane.
Yes, no, it really is. I mean, you know, Flora said so much, and it's so true. Between the complex trauma, then, you know, just living in what trauma seemed normal. They don't even know what the name trauma. So this is just how we're functioning. They automatically look at the police, you know, as the enemy, because that's what they're taught. You know, that's how they're reared. And a lot of the guys that I used to talk to when they were coming home from incarceration, obviously these were conversations that we used to always have to have, and teaching them about what trauma looks like, trauma from the neighborhood, teaching them, you know, that wasn't, you know, I don't like to say normal, but how, or the things that are going on or went on either at home or in your neighborhood isn't healthy. And the pleasant part of that is that there's an exhaustion. There was an exhaustion from the guys of having to live in that life. One of the common things I would hear from guys all the time, and I had a lot of gang members, lots of gang members I used to see individually. They said, I wish I could move. I wish I could go someplace. I remember one guy said, I wish I could go someplace where no one knew me. I wish I could start my life again. I want to live in a different neighborhood, because and I would tell them, I said, trauma is exhausting. It is complex. Trauma is mentally exhausting. And so just even teaching them what that looked like, you know, and even having some of them come to terms with their behavior. See, this is why the police responded, not saying always, you know, that, you know, because we know that there's some extreme cases, but there's a response that you're getting from them because of some of these things that's going on, or your response because you always think someone's out to get you, or, you know, just a lot of teaching that they really have to learn when it comes to trauma and trauma responses. And then also for officers to understand, for those, particularly those that are not of color, the response that you give, you could trigger someone in a way that's not necessary. You know, if they're already, you know, used to being the victim, or, you know, of abuse or violence, don't always come so abrasive. You can really, and listen, I say this as a woman who have literally counseled hundreds of gang members, and I never had a weapon in my office. You can literally talk to people and sometimes get a much better response. And I know that there are dangerous times when that's, you know, that doesn't work, but for the most part, the initial approach can sometimes get a better response, you know, depending on that. So that teaching for those officers that are not of color, it's important. And, you know, and then working with officers as clients who struggle with a lot of that too. This whole topic, the same thing, feeling their trauma from the job, from the from the for officers that don't look like them, or the powers that be that don't look like them, that where they feel retaliation if they do speak up about things that are going on that they don't see that are right. They have to deal with that. So it is definitely very widespread, and again, needed to be addressed and talked about.
Thank you. And speaking of that, so let's see through the eyes of our illustrator, Jared, how that trauma shows up in Black and Blue.
Yeah. Should I share my screen here?
Yes, please.
All right. You guys seeing it?
Yep, we can see it. So just some of the pictures showing trauma. And I don't know if anybody wants to comment on any of the pictures, because when I look at the book, I actually felt it. You know, look at the picture, Get Your Knee. I mean, and if you look at the picture on the lower right-hand side, that's the main character who's the officer. I mean, Sonia, I think you can comment, right? What are some of the signs of trauma? Maybe you can use some of these pictures to illustrate some of the physical manifestations of trauma.
First, you can see the fear. Like, it's usually very intense fear, and you can see it in his face, the officer's face, because it's almost like he doesn't believe what he's seeing, and then also too the response, the intense fear he's feeling because the crowd is so angry. There's so much anger, understandable, but there's so much anger. So even as an officer, it's like, okay, I know I have this shield up, but this, you know, against this anger out here in this crowd, I don't know what to expect. I don't know what they're going. I'm torn because I can't believe this has happened to someone. And then right now, though, in this moment, I got to stay safe. I have to stay safe in a crowd that is clearly outnumbering me, and I'm brown. So I have, you know, my people that are angry with me because I'm here, but I have to be here because I got to keep the neighborhood and the people safe. But they're mad because I'm here. And then I'm torn because it was an officer that did it. Like, there's so much going on in that moment. So much going on for a Black officer in that moment. So, and you see it. He depicts it so well in the book.
I appreciate that. And, you know, part of it is like what Flora was just saying, is like, you know, he's not going into the community to be, you know, he's going there to be a super person, right? He wants to help people. He's trying to be of service. And so in this moment, he doesn't see this as service, right? He's like, you know, just the idea of these traumas kind of like, you know, because like I said, he's experienced the, you know, going through the Trayvon Martin stuff with George Floyd, you know, he's had the talk, all these things we're talking about, he's also gone through, but he's got this added element of being like, am I on the right side of this? Like, you know, am I doing the right thing in this moment? Even though it's my job, even though, you know, it's what I'm tasked to do, is it a thing that, you know, I should be doing? And I think that's an added element of sort of just doubt that really can, I think, affect somebody, you know?
Yeah, he didn't expect it to look like that at all.
Was that? Yeah.
Exactly. And last year, I remember when this happened, I spoke with with Noble, and with the National Organization for Black and Law Enforcement, and we talked about trauma. And these were officers that are on the West Coast, and they were talking about the same thing, like just so much stress that they were dealing with because of the backlash they were getting from the community. And this was really right when everything was going on. So I spoke at two of their meetings, and that's what they were really dealing with the stress of that, because they were catching it from the neighborhood, from the people, from Black people. But again, like you both have shared, like that's, you know, like Flora said, we signed up to be of service to our community. But at that point, the community was understandably very upset and feeling extremely betrayed. And it was just really hard to do any talking at that point, but they still had to go to work and put their life on the line. And I understood like the danger, you know, the danger of that. So it was definitely a huge conversation last year.
Jared, let's see some more images.
Yeah.
So these are images that I sort of picked up as I was reading the book again. There are plenty more. I want to direct everyone to his brother, where he says, Pop's not here. So they're sort of having an interaction. This was after the Trayvon Martin incident. And just showing the beginnings of the trauma, and showing how both of the brothers are just starting to respond differently to it. Let's go to the next one. Go to the next page.
Yeah.
Next one.
Now,
again, Flora, what do you see in this?
Oh, I've been there. You know, we're an officer, especially when there's a police shooting or you know, something that the community is riled up against. I mean, we all become the enemy, and God forbid, I've been there. Whereas it has affected me, you know, when they tell us to put on that riot gear, and, you know, and that we're going into how they would use buzzwords like infiltrate a community. It almost sounds like you're going to war. Mm-hmm. And it affects me because, you know, the community, the thing about the police department, especially when you get out, they give you a series of communities to choose from. And I chose communities that I was familiar with. So I was very lucky to get Queens, where I grew up. And when you have to go into the housing authority and something like that to go find someone, and you got people from the rooftops or whatever screaming, what's that song they used to sing to me all the time? Whoop, whoop, it's the sound of the police. Whoop, whoop, it's the sound of the beast. It affected me. I'm like, I want the peace, but wearing this uniform, they really don't care. So I kind of feel like what Jared's illustration is, I just wish they would stop. I wish I was home. I wish I was eating ice cream. I just wanted to be a regular person. I kept on saying, I have a college degree. What am I doing? So it's this is not what I signed up for. I am not the killer. And it's just so hard when they portray you that way. It is traumatizing.
It's extremely.
Absolutely.
It was important for us to really sort of humanize everyone in the book, including, the police, right? Like, I think what I've learned through this process is the police aren't a monolith, right? It's not like every police officer is, going out doing these things, right? Like, most police officers aren't. And there's a lot of police officers who want change, right? Who see what's happening, and they're also disgusted. And they also want to see things move in a more just direction. And so it's important really to show a reaction from a police officer that, wasn't what some people might typically expect.
And most people, when they're in that heightened state, they're not trying to hear that there's a systemic racist issue even in the police department. They're not trying to hear that because they're in too much pain.
Right.
So they don't understand that, again, some, like you said, there are a lot of great officers out there, I'm going to say the majority. And that a lot of them are trapped in terms of how they process or deal with things. Like in the story you show, which was great in the store. I don't want to tell too much of people because they need to buy the book, but just that incident that occurred in the store and the different point of view between Jackson and the white officer, just that different point of view. And that happens all the time, so often that, oh, if I can deal with them this way and diffuse. And I remember talking to, actually, in fact, I had an officer who was a client that said that, like, interesting. Wow. They said that when they would go to in certain neighborhoods, urban neighborhoods, and they could easily say how a situation can be diffused. But when a lot of other officers, white officers would come, the energy would get turned up because they would come with that strong energy that was not necessary for that situation. And then this officer went on to tell me, share other stories, when we worked, of where they diffused a lot of situations and how good they felt about diffusing situations with, with Blacks, where they know, and this is a Black officer, where they know that had it been handled by someone that wasn't of color, it might not have gone as smoothly. And really the main thing, one thing that people one thing that people need, and especially that will help in these situations, they want to feel heard. And I think when these type of situations go on, there's so much activity going on of arresting and looting, different things. People they don't feel like they're being heard. And so therefore they feel powerless. And then that's where the anger and the rage kicks in. So with the community and in this, they want to feel like someone in blue is like, we hear you, we hear your pain, we hear your disappointment, we hear your frustration. We hear, and that we're going to do something. And that's, like I said, that when they don't, that can fuel a lot of the rage that goes on.
A lot of that also, Sonia, comes from experience. There's a lot of white officers that I've worked with, but they've worked in really urban areas. And when they go to different station houses, quite calm. As opposed to somebody who is a rookie or someone who has maybe under 5 years on the job, who's not culturally diverse. I mean, I had an officer, a white officer who's had like maybe 15 years on the job, worked in Bed-Stuy, and he showed me the best Jamaican beef patties in Queens, So I think it has a lot to do with culture and how to adapt with the community.
And a willingness. And a willingness.
Willing. You're absolutely right.
Willingness to adapt. Yeah, no, absolutely. I worked, I also was I worked per diem in a women's mental health shelter. And so we used to have to call the police all the time for EDPs. Always. We were always calling, the police officers. And there were some officers that would come in that were absolutely wonderful in diffusing the situations. And then every once in a blue moon we get someone and I had to be a buffer because I'm like, oh, this thing's gonna go left. I'm gonna be left with this manic person because you're not dealing with this, so it all depends. Like you said, the experience, I think the experience and the willingness to want to adapt.
Absolutely.
Really important.
So, Jared, there's one more picture I want to show, and then I'd like to talk about solutions. It's near the end of the book, so it's Jackson's brother. He's kind of standing there watching. Is he sort of standing in the middle of the protesters? You see this look on his face. I think it's like around page 48.
This one?
That's the picture right there.
Yeah.
On the bottom. If you, Jackson's brother is there with the bandana around his face. But from the distance, you can see those eyes. To me, and look at how different he is from the top when he's trying to bring in peace to that just feeling of helplessness at the bottom, that feeling of despair. And even just the rage around him, just all depictions of the manifestations of trauma, what it looks like externally.
Absolutely.
So, but I wanted us to not just be down and think about the trauma. I'm glad we thought about how it comes up, watching, being exposed to violence in our communities, again, like that young boy being gunned down when you're living in a community, or even if you're not, just hearing about these events over and over again, hearing about instances of injustice, or being on the front lines and having to manage all that. So Sonia, what do we do about trauma? Again, we started with the talk, what can parents do about trauma? What do individuals do? What should we do about all this trauma that we're experiencing?
We need to have the conversation. We have to educate so many people about this, from our we have to educate more officers about it, because they don't know. We have to educate educators. We have to educate parents. We have to really have more of these kind of conversations, and everybody really needs to make that a really big topic, what trauma looks like, because it needs to be normalized, because so many people, again, are trapped by it because they have no idea what it looks like. Again, when I dealt with a lot of men that were coming home from prison, I always talked about trauma because I wanted to normalize some of the feelings they had, even it's the little thing to me, but a big deal to them, coming home and being in a street, in a neighborhood where there's lots of people all on top of each other, like helping them to understand, no, you've been in an environment where there was a lot of trauma. So, maybe you need to go places in an off-peak so it's not so crowded. Like really educate. I've educated so many gang members on PTSD, and they literally, and I never got pushback. Like they were willing to hear this type of information. And so programs have to make sure that they have trauma education, trauma response. The schools definitely have to teach it. That's a whole other conversation right there. And just really making it a mainstream conversation so that people can, again, feel that it's okay that I've talked to someone, that I can get some assistance with this. This is what this looked like. Because so many people ignore or don't even know. They really ignore out of ignorance. This happened to me. And going back to what Flora said, which was perfect. When you talked about the kid who saw his brother got handcuffed, no one in that moment thought that kid is traumatized. No one in that moment. Now you and I immediately would have known, oh my God, somebody got to talk to him. The kid is traumatized, but no one thinks about that. Like that this child is feeling traumatized. So this is why it has to be a conversation. It needs to be presentations, work environments need to bring it up. It really has to be, like I said, a mainstream conversation so people can feel comfortable and safe to be able to acknowledge and get help when needed.
Great. And so I'd like to bring in some of our audience through their comments, because this is this is a community, and I want us all to come into the conversation. So there's some comments. One comment is, it sounds like much more training is needed, which is really what you're saying, Sonia. And then Vanessa says, there's a lack of culturally competence. Unfortunately, it is woven in the fabric of law enforcement, the system working how it's designed to work. Thank you for that comment. So I think that's something that we've been touching for. And so there's a question here, and the question was sort of raised: can Black and Blue be used to help manage the conversations about trauma and the talk? And would it really be effective? Would this be too much pressure on educators into bringing this conversation into school in an educational setting?
I think they don't need to necessarily bring it really heavy, but what I think educators need to understand it themselves. And the reason why I say that is because, again, I have clients past and current that are teachers. And there's so many things that go on in the classrooms. I mean, it's just horrible what goes on. That is trauma. And either the higher ups don't understand it, that is trauma. Like principals that are, I'm just going to say, especially a lot of principals, non-Black, higher up educators don't understand that either these kids are responding, this behavior is attached to trauma. Because I used to have conversations with when educators would talk about their students, and then I said, well, hold it, what's going on with that kid at home? And then when they would tell me, I said, this is a trauma response. They're not a bad kid. This is a response to trauma. I had a guy once who come home from prison and anger management, and we had a brief conversation about his father, and I said his mother and father got divorced when he was young, and I said, and for some reason he said he was close to his father, and I asked him, I said, did you tear up classrooms when you were a kid? And he just looked at me and shook his head. And I said, these are the types of things where the behavior gets so much attention instead of why is the behavior occurring. So I think teachers and all educators need to be educated. They don't have to necessarily talk about it to their kids, but they need to be able to recognize it so then they can do the proper referrals in the schools. That's what needs to happen, because they have enough that they're doing.
I truly believe this needs to be part of a curriculum. I mean, books such as Jared's and especially those who want to be educators, they need a social aspect of it. I mean, we all know about shootings in the school and how that to wrap their head on when a shooter's in, what to do. I also believe in we should have conversations about the talk for all children, not only just Black and brown children, for all children, because the other child might not understand the trauma this one goes through. So they need to empathize, to feel something for that and have a voice as well. You're more in numbers. I truly believe in that. So this should be a curriculum that in order to be an educator, they have to have an understanding. And yes, we can bring in specialists into the school, but when you're an educator for like 10, 15 years, it's like what Sonia said, you got to be willing, and to be a part of that. I think it has to start from the ground up, part of a curriculum and part of education as they come in. It has to be. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Because it's getting, and I hear from a lot of, teachers where their schools have been gentrified, and which is fine. But again, the powers that be that are now in these schools, in these neighborhoods, they're not educated to trauma and are not very concerned. So they're missing so much. The kids' behavior is saying so. If you have an education, you'll recognize, that behavior is a response to something, as opposed to that's a bad kid. That's a response to something. 9 times out of 10, I can usually point it. When you have a shift in a kid's behavior, something's going on. Something's going on.
And special ed is not the answer. That's what they're doing to them. They're separating them from mainstream, and that's not the answer.
Lord, y'all are preaching to the choir. You have to see the chat. People are Amen. And exactly.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, no, and
Board has been taught, but I want to just I know Jared was waiting patiently. See, this is what happens when you get in a room of women, Jared.
No, I'm in awe. I'm in awe.
East Coast women, you got to jump in.
I'm learning stuff. I'm taking notes.
Jared, the first thing I would do as we get this curriculum, we need books like yours.
Yes.
We need those graphic novels to see it. They absolutely do. We don't have books like yours.
No.
Well, that's how I learned to read, is through reading comic books, because they're so visceral. They're so immediate, like you just, and you could say so much and it's so expressive. So it's important to sort of like translate that into this book. And, also I think part of the trauma is, what you were saying earlier, is just the idea that these people, these kids, these students aren't feeling heard. They're not feeling seen. So I think part of that is like creating art where they are, the stars, right? Where they do see themselves, where they do hear themselves. And so that's also very important, and for this book especially, it was important not just, like I said, not to give the answers, because the answers, there is no answer, right? The answers are so, it's all over the place. It's so big, but to at least start a discussion, like the idea of our teachers running away from these hard topics, it doesn't mean much because these kids aren't, right? These kids are facing it front and center. Like I remember when I was in middle school, it was during the Rodney King beating and trial. And, and we actually stopped class to show this stuff, like to show the verdict. And like I said, this is stuff that you have to, that as a student, as a young person, you are dealing with. So the best thing you can do, I feel like the best teachers I had were the ones that confronted it, that weren't afraid to talk about it in, again, productive, constructive ways. And hopefully this book can do something like that, right? We need more books that are able to foster those kind of conversations. Otherwise, we don't come to solutions if we're not at least confronting these things and talking about them. If we just not ignore, but if we find ways to not to sidestep them, we'll never come to any kind of equilibrium or any kind of solution,
So that was great. And I think that's a nice way to wrap our evening, because we are over an hour and there's a million questions. Someone wrote, and I'm going to save this question, Rudy Hall, thank you. What role do communities play and how the police view them? I think that's going to be one of the topics for my next Living While Black, Blue, and Pink, but that's a whole entirely different topic and conversation. And I appreciate that question and would love to answer it, but we will be here for another 2 or 3 hours just on that. And I really do think I'm going to incorporate that in our next conversation. And Naya, I'm sorry, I do see your hand up. If you could put your comment in the chat as we close. With that, I really appreciate everyone tuning in to talk about a very, very relevant, timely, and needed topic. Please take this information and share it. Please support Jared Sams in this book. The information is in the chat. The book's only $11, $11. Everybody got $11. Buy one for a friend, give it to a young person. If you know an educator or a group that's interested in reading this book and doing a read-in, this book would be a great vehicle to have lots of these conversations. So I thank you. And Sonia, if anybody has any questions, how can they get in touch with you?
Okay, so that's perfect. You can find me on Instagram at Sonia Davy. I'm actually on Clubhouse also. And yes, I'm on Clubhouse, and I'm actually going to be having a conversation on food, mood, and medication. And that's Sonia D Wellness. I think that's who I am. But you can follow me on Instagram. You can go to my website, which is soniadavy.com, Twitter, Sonia Davy, LinkedIn, Sonia Davy, and my email is info@soniadavy.com. So please follow me and send me a DM, because this is definitely a conversation I want to continue to have in whatever way we can.
Great.
Thank you.
Laura, any closing?
Oh, yes. I like to say, especially coming from Senator Leroy Comrie, I've known him my whole career, and he's always worked for community. And he always kept us in check. I just wanted to say that. And the beauty of it is Leroy Comrie trusted us with his children when we had a youth program, and he let his kids come. So you know, police working, when you could put your own out there, you talk that talk and you walk that walk, and Leroy Comrie did that. That's not a plug. I'm just saying, we need more people like the Leroy Comries in life. We could work with community. It has to work hand in hand. We need these books out here, these comic books, get the kids reading, get the kids visualizing. We got to stop the trauma, like Sonia said. We got to stop the trauma. We got to ease the pain. That's all I got to say. You know, I'm going to keep it real.
Thank you for keeping it real. Thank you again, Jared. Thank you again, Sonia. And again, Light Switch Learning, thank you again for letting us know about this book and learn about, again, Black and Blue and the other line of family engagement resources, social emotional resources, international text, and picture books, professional books, and more. That information is in the chat. Again, thank you again for tuning in for Living Wild Black, Blue, and Pink. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another topic. And this time, since it's Father's Day in June, we're going to turn it over to the brothers. So I have this powerful brother who's actually listening in tonight, Dr. Al Titus, who's actually a retired NYPD detective that also, I think was a detective, so you'll correct me next when we see you, who also received his PhD. So we're going to engage in some interesting dialogue. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Night.
Thank you.